Welcome back to the another episode of the Ali Show. Here we discuss real problems that leaders in the credit and AR industry face in the B2B space, and we also talk about implementable solutions that we have been able to achieve for our own customers. And we hope that this gives users an idea of how to solve these problems as well as what to look out for in the future. My name is Ali. I'm the senior manager for product and implementation at Bectran. As part of that role, I lead our product strategy and growth, as well as work with our enterprise clients to solve their tough and dirty problems. Today, I have here with me Mr. David, who is the product manager at Bectran, and the topic for today is how to implement a world-class credit and AR solution for a company in the construction space, specifically dealing with credit applications and job sheets. Hi, David. Welcome. How you doing?
Thanks, Ali. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Great to be here talking about a topic that's so prevalent right now in the industry that we service. So, looking forward to the conversation. Also want to give kudos. This is the second episode of this podcast. So, the first episode must have been good enough for us to rejoin here. So.
Some hiccups, but we're getting better. We're getting better. We'll get better with time. So yeah, jumping right in. So I guess the first thing we'd want to discuss is that we want a little background on what's going on with departments that are overwhelmed with job sheets. I mean, what are you seeing? I know that you work a lot with our customers in the construction space, just to get users an idea of even what like job sheets are, and then what exactly does that look like for a company that deals with a lot of them on a daily basis.
Yeah, so first I want to define what it means to be using job sheets, what a job sheet is and what it's used for. In the construction space, projects are the majority of what credit departments deal with on a daily basis. A job sheet is essentially just a way to record the information about a project, where it's located, funding information about it, who owns it, and so forth, what the job is going to be for, right? So that the provider knows what to expect from that job, what the materials will be, things like that. When it comes to dealing with a high volume of those job sheets, typically, and that's what I want to define first too, is there's two things that typically bog down departments in that space, and that's one, just the sheer volume of requests, if you're dealing with lots and lots of job sheets on a daily basis. And then also the second piece, which people often forget about, is how long it takes you to actually deal with those requests, assess them, and approve them, so that you can get the material out the door. So those are the two main things. Now I'll explain to you a little bit about what the problem is and what that means to the departments that are dealing with these high volume situations. One is a lot of those are typically repetitive work. So high volume of requests usually means there's a large percentage in there where it is the same type of project in a similar dollar amount range over and over again, possibly even from the same customers. Yeah. So repetitive work is one thing that departments are dealing with. Repeat offenders is another, where you have the same customers providing job sheets to you in the similar manner. That often slows you down because the customers are the ones that are providing that information to you, leading into the next point, which is data entry accuracy, right? It's making sure that you get the right information up front so that you can make your decisions accurately. And those two things are really, really correlated. The other piece is complex job application process. So if up front the customer has a ton of questions or they struggle completing jobs, maybe you even have a paper-based process for that.
Oh, we've seen that.
Exactly. And so if you
that's
have
why it's called a job sheet. I actually learned that later. That's where the term comes from. It's just a sheet.
It's just a sheet. Yeah, exactly. And so a complex job application process obviously hogs on time, both on the customer and on the department themselves. And then on top of that, if it's not self-explanatory for the end user to provide that information, there's a lot of back and forth where then the department needs to spend time on supporting their process customer facing instead of being able to evaluate the existing set of project sheets. So, and of course, not to forget the departments that are dealing with these job sheets, high volume of job sheets especially, they're still responsible for assessing credit risk for new customers, right?
Yeah.
So the credit department has that multi-functionality of not just projects, they also have to deal with the new customer credits.
What are all the other things that go along in a credit department? Collecting and working on disputes and taking payments, and I mean, it's not like that other work slows down, right?
Right, exactly. And the process that we want to focus on today is obviously upfront, like the application and an intake process, right? That a lot of companies are looking to simplify, standardize, and automate.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, another part of this process is also the customer experience as well as the sales team working on these jobs, right? So, it's not... for a new customer, right, there's a lot of information that is required, right, because you don't know this customer, and you're trying to vet them for the first time, so obviously you want to be careful. But for a job, if it's coming from a customer you already know, you have a certain degree of confidence, on the customer themselves. Obviously you have to do your analysis on the job, and it's a different process for sales as well, and being able to integrate that with the similar to how you do it for new applications. I mean, we'll talk about that too, but that's another problem as well, because if it's a paper-based or manual, or hell, we've seen like Excel files as well. I remember from one customer that we actually worked on. So that's another piece. I mean, we'll talk about that. Moving on. So I guess good job explaining what it was. What do you see are the biggest problems that occur in a department that processes a high volume of these requests? Like, what do you think, and what do customers say that, like, when they come to us, what do they want to solve for?
Yeah, so there's really two main things that we typically hear. One is, look, they come to us and they explain their process, and in the process of them explaining, it highlights their deficiencies in process optimization. So non-optimized processes on the job sheet intake flow and on the approval process flow, those are key items that hog time and money and value in the department, on the customer, and it just slows down the entire order to cash process on the upfront piece. The second thing is that companies spend too much time and too much effort on the low dollar value but high volume requests, right? And that's obviously the entire problem that we're trying to solve. You can look at it in a 2x2 matrix, right? The volume of requests and the dollar amount associated with those requests. And you can very quickly assess which quadrant you need to spend actual hours in versus which quadrants are very good candidates to automate, because again, going back to the point about repetitive work, if a department spends 80% of their time on repetitive tasks, those are really, really good examples for automation, and that's what we'll get into here in a minute.
Yeah, good point on the high volume, low dollar, because I personally have seen examples of some of our larger customers who have like large jobs, a couple $100,000 jobs or $1 million jobs, right? I mean, those take, rightly so, like they take time, right? They a lot of research and vetting all of the parties, as well as filing the lien with the third-party providers and whatnot. So and you don't want to take time away from that doing repetitive work. So that's a great point.
Yep. Those are critical things, right? You're extending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth on a project. That's where you want to be spending your man hours instead of the $5,000 to $10,000 range, or even up to $20,000.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the first question is, in a traditional credit department for a company that's doing both new customer credit applications or COD applications and job sheets. So like, how do you divide the work stream, and what do you see the differences in like the processing and how they get approved, and how they get analyzed and how they get approved?
Yeah, so the key difference between a credit application, credit approval process, as you're aware, and a job process is, on the job side, you know your customer 9 times out of 10, right? You have some rapport with them. They've purchased from you before, unless this is the first time that they submitted a project request to you. But typically what we see is that for jobs, you know the customer, they have some kind of payment history with you. They have a relationship with, whether even with the credit department or, of course, with sales. So the companies, they know each other. And that's a big value add when it comes to the evaluation process, because you can leverage that. On the credit side, it's mostly new customer risk. There's obviously, of course, times where for an existing customer you request an updated credit app, but the majority of times, and that's what we want to address here, is applications for new customer pose a lot higher of a risk than jobs. So you need to address them differently, you need to assess them differently. Of course, they're two completely, entirely different processes, where on the credit side, things that you want to leverage is third-party data sources, right? Bureaus. You want to look at fraud prevention up front, because that's been a huge problem across the industry, not just the construction industry, but other industries as well. You want to leverage those kinds of integrations because they allow you to have that kind of peace of mind that, all right, I've done my due diligence, I've looked at what the industry says about this customer, right? You may leverage trade credit groups as well to see what is this customer's relationship with other vendors in my space, because often, they're buying from your competitors too, if you want to believe that or not. Yeah. On the job side, you want to leverage more what I mentioned earlier, right? You want to leverage that relationship. You want to leverage their payment experience with you, their outstanding receivables. And then, of course, you've got the securities on the job that you really don't have on the credit side, right? You've got the ability to either lien a job, or you have the ability to collect on that bond, and that you don't have on the credit side.
Yeah. Another point I'd like to add to that is that there is some work that happens for jobs that is needed, from a post-approval perspective, is, what you actually mentioned is filing a lien on the job. So, you have to send, or at least sending it to your lien providers so that they have enough information so that they can file a lien if it's necessary. So that means, making sure that all of the job information that you've collected, owners, general contractors, subcontractors, is sent in a timely fashion to the lien service providers. These are companies we integrate with, many of them we've worked with over the years, so that they can send a notice to the owner or file a lien as needed. So that's another difference between like new customer applications versus job sheets, and that's a very crucial part of the job sheet process as well. We've been able to help customers automate that piece based on being able to model that based on a certain criteria, risk, as well as information on the job sheet itself. But that's another big difference, right? So companies spend a lot of time just manually doing that, and again, for the low dollar volume ones. So that's another point that on how it's different.
Yeah, and the thing that you want to drive home based on what you said is it needs to be part of your process. It needs to be defined, and the department needs to follow that, right? Because if you lose out on a few here and there, probably not that big of a deal. But at scale, right, that adds up, and so you really need to make sure that is baked into your process, and leveraging automation for that is a great way to make sure that happens.
Yeah. stemming from your point on automation, David, I think the next thing that we want to focus on is like what does automation look like in terms of collecting information, scoring these requests, auto approving them, as well as making sure that these requests are sent to the correct agencies for lien tracking. Can you walk us through? Well, one, what kind of tools are available, as well as how you've seen like that be executed with a combination of these tools in a real world scenario for one of our customers.
Yeah. So the key to that is building your automation strategy up front, is establishing your rules of play, so to say, when it comes to the automation that you want to have in place and the outcome that you're looking for that automation from. So first, to develop that strategy, you need to take a look at your current process and identify bottlenecks that you have, because any exceptions that occur in your process can break the automation, right? If there's some step somewhere that always requires or occasionally requires a manual intervention by someone for some reason, and there's a ton of different examples out there, that will break the automation flow, because the automation rolls in a way where it doesn't like exception cases all the time. There's certain ones that you can plan for, that you can build into your process, but if there's too many and if they're too specific, it doesn't work. So identifying bottlenecks is the key thing for building that strategy up front. And we've done this with customers all the time as part of the implementation process that we have in not just for the construction industry, but for all clients that leverage our automation tools.
Yeah.
That's part of the process that Vectran operates with. Second is you need to assess what level of risk are you looking to are you comfortable with, because that drives your scoring decisions that you make, and it drives other decisions too down the road in the process. And then you need to define the approval outcome, right? Because you have to tell the automation what it needs to approve and what it needs to approve for. So that includes things like the credit terms. It includes things like the dollar amounts, depending on the risk levels, right? I'll give you an example of this too. There's really two main flavors of this when it comes to the credit limit that we've seen. One is you approve the customer basically for what they're asking for. Yeah. So the customer wants $22,000 on that project, and if they meet all your criteria and there's no red flags, you will approve for that amount, right? And the terms maybe that they already have with you if it's a project. There's another way to do this, which is you look at a certain dollar amount range that you're comfortable with extending to a customer in a certain risk range. So let's say you come up with a scoring model that defines customers on a risk, high risk, medium risk, and low risk basis, right? So any customer in the high risk is not going to get immediately approved. Those require manual intervention. But what we've seen successfully implemented is building in some sort of floor credit limit approvals, right? To where the customer might ask for $15,000, but you're comfortable extending more than that to a customer in that space. So you're going to approve them maybe for $20,000 or $25,000, right? And sales is going to be happy about that too, which is important in this entire process. We haven't mentioned them yet. We'll talk about those later. But if the customer has more credit limit available than what they're asking for, they're likely to purchase more product, right? Yeah. Because that's just how human behavior works. And so we've seen that implemented successfully as well. It's not necessarily low risk, right? There's obviously always risk involved in extending more credit up front, but we've seen that has worked in the past. Probably needs to be closely monitored, but that's another way to do this from a risk-based approach. Then you transition into the transaction, and the execution level.
Yeah.
So what we're looking for there is, all right, what does the actual scoring look like that we want to implement? That can include pulling outside data sources in, bureaus, fraud prevention tools that we offer can provide you a holistic view of the risk of that organization, potentially fraudulent behavior on that request, right? Where on the other side, you could also leverage your existing relationship with that customer, their payment experience with you, and data points that you collect on them. You bring all of that in, and you have a holistic picture of where this customer actually stands. Now, some companies won't necessarily look at external data sources if they already have a bunch of history and transactional data with that client, right? That makes sense too. You save a little bit on that. But that's one key step in the process. Fraud prevention, we've already talked about. That's key. And then lien tracking is another one in the job process. Once a project's approved, you got to make sure you secure those lien rights.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, just to add to that as well, a lot of the heartburn that comes, in a manual processing environment is that it's the same thing over and over, right? Like what you just explained, like one of the things I wanted listeners or at least companies in the construction space to understand that like this is not hard to, like, what we're telling you is not some, black box that, cannot be solved easily, right? Like the thing with jobs is that it's extremely repetitive work, and these tools, and we do this a lot, it's actually easier to automate the job process in terms of approval than it is for your new customers, because there's nuances, and you got a lot of fraud there, like you were saying, and you got a lot of other factors there, but we for jobs we don't see it as much, just because you have the relationship with the customer, as well as a lot of the same items over and over again. Your customers are using the same contractors, and what kind of jobs your customers do, and you also know what kind of purchasing power they have, so you have a good sense of like what you're dealing with. So I think that's another item I just wanted to make sure our listeners understand. And I guess one of the things we want to focus on is in this whole job sheet processing environment, what does the sales and credit relationship look like? What are some key aspects of that relationship, and how also can we make sure that it gets strengthened over time? How can we use tools and processes to do that?
Yeah, so there's really two trains of thought here. One is I'm going to call it the traditional way of the credit and sales relationship, which is really sales wants credit to extend the most that they can from a credit limit standpoint, because that ties into their quota and
unlimited credit.
It helps them, right? Yeah, give them more credit. It's good for them. They'll buy more. I'll get more.
Yeah.
That kind of idea. And credit, of course, wants to mitigate their risk, right? They want to mitigate their exposure because they don't want to run into a ton of bad debt just because sales said, no, the guy is good for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the traditional way of thinking about this. But in the modern way of thinking about this, and we've seen a lot of customers implement this train of thought, this idea that you establish common ground between credit and sales. You're working towards a common goal, a shared goal, which is really, yes, you want to increase business the most that you can, right? You want to grow your company at the best possible rates that you can. But it has to come not at the expense of a ton of bad debt and a lot of outstanding receivables that you can't collect on. So if that idea between sales and credit is aligned, you have the perfect mix for a good relationship. And of course, that relationship, like any, needs to be maintained because sales will come up with initiatives and credit will too. And so aligning those two departments is one of the biggest value adds that we've seen. And at the end of the day, it's really about feedback, feedback from the standpoint of the credit department, feedback from the customer. right? You need to understand what are your customers' pain points in the process, in the communication with the credit team, when it comes to collecting on debt, right? They might have a thing or two to say, but then it's also important that you listen to what sales has to say, because sales is who maintains that relationship with the client, with the customer. There's a lot of face-to-face contact.
The first touch. They're the first touch on the customer, right? That too. I mean, we want to make sure that when a customer comes, I mean, we have the same thing, right? When a customer comes to you, like, and it's the first time they're talking to you, like, you want to have a good experience for them as well, and you want to make sure. I mean, the credit process, right? Like, it's the first time the customer is interacting with your company, so you want to make it as smooth as possible. I mean, they don't really care about sales or credit, right? They just really want to make sure that they're able to get what they need from you and move on. So, like, that's a great point.
Exactly, and that's where the company needs to service that client as a unity, right? As one organization, not as two different departments that expect different outcomes and different things. So I think the managing the expectation there too is crucial. But you hit it on the head.
Yeah. Thanks. As we come to the end, I want to thank Mr. David for coming on. Really appreciate the insight as well as getting those real world examples. One of the things we want to make sure that we do for our listeners is explain to them the extent of these problems as well as how other customers have done it, so that they can have an understanding of how easily to solve these problems and have some sort of baseline to go off of. And thanks so much to our listeners for tuning in to the podcast. We'll be back next Friday, but until then, if you found this valuable, you can subscribe on Spotify and view any resources in the episode description. That'll be all, and bye everyone.